Alright, hear me out. Black Myth Wukong is the perfect introduction to Souls-like games. Now, I can already hear the comments screaming,
But it's not a Souls-like game. It's linear. It's an action-adventure game. It's nothing like a Souls-like game.
and okay, chill. I agree with you. It's not a Souls-like game, but it is the perfect introduction to one. Let me explain. Straight up, the difficulty is there. Bosses are hard. They're unforgiving and straight up merciless at times. But the systems surrounding the combat are much more forgiving, and because of this, Black Myth Wukong is a perfect intro game for someone who wants to get into the genre, but doesn't want to jump straight into the fire that is Souls-like games. Today, we're going to dive into these various systems that Black Myth Wukong has to offer, the story that's being presented, and the world that this gorgeous game is set in. But before we begin, if you like this type of content, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to see more videos like this. Now, let's jump in. Let's start with the world that this game is set in. I mean, in case you can't tell, this game is absolutely gorgeous. In fact, I would go as far as to say that this is one of the greatest looking games I've ever played. The last time I felt this wowed by graphics was Red Dead Redemption 2 all the way back in 2018. And that's a fantastic achievement to live up to. Game Science, the developers of Black Myth, really went above and beyond making this world as immersive as possible. Trees and grass sway in the wind as you run into them. The water is gorgeous looking. The density of foliage is simply outstanding. This is one of the few games I can say looks amazing and has the gameplay and systems to back it up. And that's straight up impressive. But in case you haven't noticed by the gameplay, this isn't an open world. It's a linear game with a linear story being told. You're thrown into a large, I hesitate to say semi-open, but somewhat open world where you're more or less guided through various areas, defeating bosses along the way, and finding shrines to save and upgrade your character at. Like I said, the world itself is gorgeous, and there's plenty of variety in the various biomes that each level, or chapter as these games like to call it, have to offer. However, there is just one issue that I would like to point out. There is absolutely no map to guide yourself with. I totally get why they did this. You've created this gorgeous open world and you want the player to be as immersed as possible when they're in it. But you don't want to sacrifice that with a billion markers on a map. And in my opinion, this absolutely could have worked, and it could have been a great decision if they just added a few quality of life improvements that I think would have greatly benefited this game. Like I mentioned earlier, there are plenty of secrets to find in each level, from various hidden chests that grant you extra items or levels, right up to massive secret bosses that give you new abilities. Some of these hidden items, however, are insanely easy to miss, which, may be by design, but when you do miss them, it's almost impossible to backtrack and try and find them without looking up a guide of some sort. When you stop at shrines, you have the opportunity to fast travel to other shrines that you unlocked in the earlier portions of the level. The problem with this, they only give you the name of the shrine. There's no real indication of what portion of the level that this spot was in, or if there's truly more to discover than what I had already seen when I was there. I think a stripped down map with little to no icons and just the regions with potential pathways in that specific region could be a really great addition. Maybe it has one of those fog of war systems where the region is clouded when you first get to it, but as you explore, the fog of war lifts and you can see the various paths you've taken and the ones you haven't. Look, truly, outside of this one small gripe, the open world and the exploration that comes with it is truly fantastic. It is one of the most immersive worlds I've ever been in, and I truly recommend everyone just give it a shot at least once. But look, what good is an amazing world if there's not good gameplay to back it up? Thankfully, that's not the case here. Black Myth Wukong has plenty of difficulty in its gameplay, but it also has great and enticing systems that honestly kept me coming back and kept me engaged throughout the runtime of this game. The combat is the bread and butter of this game, and truly this is where it is most similar to a Souls-like. The game is just boss fight after boss fight, and some of them are brutally hard. Dodge times are short, enemies don't give you much of an opening to lay down your attacks, and in a couple of hits, bro, you're dead. Thankfully, you have some cool systems to aid you in combat. For one, you have 4 magic abilities you can equip. These cost mana, which in the beginning can only be replenished by going to shrines. This forces you to be strategic on when and where to use these abilities. Sometimes the closest shrine is pretty far from that next boss, which means you're going to have to fight through some mob style enemies. Now, maybe one-on-one these enemies aren't too bad, but as they start ganging up on you, and as you start getting into the later chapters, these fights can become tough in their own right. You're going to want to have to pick and choose when you expel your mana, because by the time you get to the boss, you're going to need some of those abilities that'll going to help you in that boss fight. One of the cool abilities is the freeze ability. This ability is super useful early on as it completely freezes the enemy you're fighting for a short amount of time, allowing you to either heal or go to town on some free hits. When you're learning the game, this ability can be life-saving at times. Again, it's reinforcing the fact that this game is a great introduction to more brutal Souls-like games. You get the feel of the unforgiving combat, while also having some abilities that alleviate that brutal grind that some Souls-likes offer. Another ability you have is the ability to temporarily shapeshift into various enemies you've defeated and use their abilities. This is a really cool system that kind of rewards you for going the extra mile and defeating some of those optional bosses that you may otherwise wouldn't have. A lot of times, these abilities can really help when fighting a boss, which is always really useful. You also have a variety of potions that are going to help you. Some may reduce or increase damage, others may give you resistance to fire or shock or freeze damage. They can be either brewed later in the game or bought from shrines. Either way, I truly didn't use these potions that much when in combat. A lot of times, I forgot about them and I was mostly focused on maximizing my magic abilities. I will say, the most useful potions did seem to be the ones that reduce damage from poison, fire, shock, and freeze. A lot of times, enemies that dealt this type of damage were tough and they could seriously lower your health bar if you didn't pop one of those potions beforehand. I mean, overall, the combat is really solid. Like I said, it's not exactly like a Souls-like game, but at the very least, I would say it's at least Souls adjacent. Hitboxes for the bosses feel pretty good for the most part, and I never felt like I had an unfair death. Every time I died, it definitely felt like it was my fault. You know, maybe I didn't time the dodges good enough, or maybe I got too aggressive in my attacks and I let the boss get a few hits on me, or just straight up maybe I didn't know the moveset of the boss yet and they did something that I didn't know they could do. Either way, this game really incentivizes you getting better at the game, learning those boss movesets, and kind of dominating that way. I mean, it's really rewarding when you sit there dying over and over and over and over again, but then finally beating him because you felt like you earned it. You felt like you put in all that effort, all that time learning that boss, and you earned that win, which, I mean, is also insanely rewarding and is a reason why people come to Souls-likes and play Souls-like so much. The overall progression is the other aspect of the gameplay that I think is pretty excellently done. Like I talked about, this is where it pretty heavily diverts from a typical Souls-like game, and it kind of does its own thing. For one, a typical Souls-like game, you earn some form of currency every time you kill an enemy that you use to level up or purchase new weapons or abilities that are going to help you in battle. As you build this currency up, you have more and more of an incentive to get to the nearest rest point so you can save, heal up, and more importantly, use the currency that you've built up. If you die, you lose all that currency, and the only way to get it back is to go to that enemy that killed you or the spot that you died at and retrieve that currency. If you die before you get there, well, tough shit, that currency is gone. Black Myth takes this general sentiment and makes it a lot more user-friendly. You still have that currency. It's called will in this game, and it's just like other Souls-like games, you earn it by killing enemies and bosses. But the great thing about it is that you never lose it. If you die, it doesn't matter. That will you earned when you were fighting up until that point stays with you. Now, some may see this as cheating because it's kind of defeating the purpose of the game. You know, you're supposed to have that grind. You're supposed to have that tension when you're building up this currency so that when you get to that rest point, there's that relief. Like, okay, I've made it here. I can now, purchase the things I want, get those upgrades that I want, and also save the game. But to me, I don't see it as cheating. I see it as the developers respecting your time. Now, for example, I'm a full-time college student. Between classes, homework, the gym, hanging out with my friends, I don't really have that much time at the end of every day to sit down and play video games. Now, if I'm playing a Souls-like game, for example, say I'm going through this world and I'm building up all this currency and then I die and I lose everything, all that time I just spent for hours, maybe even building up that currency is just gone. And now I don't really have the time to, go and get it again. That's just frustrating to me. That's something that I don't want to do, and it's what's kept me off of Souls-like games for so long. But Black Myth Wukong kind of rectifies that and just allows you to keep that currency whether you die or you don't die. And to me, at least, that's very appreciated. Another thing is that it's respecting the skill levels of players. If you're a new player and you're new to Souls-like games like these, if you die, that is so discouraging. Like that's discouraging to the point that you don't even want to pick up the game and keep playing anymore. So in that sense, yes, the gameplay can be frustratingly difficult at times, but the progression isn't actively hindering you as well. It's there to support you and to help you get better at the game and get those better skills so you can defeat those bosses that are giving you trouble. And I really appreciate that. Black Myth also isn't an RPG by any standards. As you earn will by killing various enemies, you also level up, and this gives you a skill point that you can use to unlock a new ability or maybe increase your damage, health, or stamina. There aren't any stat multipliers or, levels above the enemies that you fight, so you can fight a boss at level 30 or at level 50 depending on how fast you're speed running through the game. Black Myth also doesn't have a traditional loot system either. Common enemies don't drop loot, and you don't find loot in chests around the world either. You earn new armor unlocks that you can then craft by progressing through the story and defeating bosses. And the same goes for the weapon upgrades as well. And that's really the only way you can get better armor or better weapons. I like that for the most part, and it definitely provides a more easygoing experience as you're going through the game, so you don't have to worry about being under-leveled or over-leveled for an area. Look, overall, Black Myth Wukong has the perfect mix between frustratingly difficult gameplay and rewarding systems that consistently incentivize the player to keep playing, and also being accessible to new players that maybe don't have the most time in the world or are newer to the game, or maybe they just care more about the story instead. Speaking of story, Black Myth Wukong is an adaptation of a 16th century novel called Journey to the West. Now, I'm someone who doesn't really know the story of Journey to the West. I'm not familiar with it, but I appreciated that the story was definitely easy enough to follow. It also has one of the coolest intro scenes I've ever seen in a video game. The massive towering deities of heaven and that initial fight that teaches you the game is truly awesome. From there, the premise of the story is simple enough. You play as the Destined One, and your mission is simple: retrieve the 6 senses of Sun Wukong and fulfill the prophecy. From there, the story definitely takes a backseat to the gameplay, and I'll be the first to say that I'm more of a narrative-driven gamer. I love great stories told through this medium. It helps me immerse myself in these amazing worlds that these insanely talented developers create. But here, the story taking a backseat doesn't really bother me at all. The gameplay and the world are intriguing enough to the point that I don't really need the story to be in my face at all times. But again, since the premise is so simple, it's pretty easy to understand the story bits that they do show. You're going through boss after boss to get to these 6 senses and revive Sun Wukong. Like I keep saying, again, this type of story is the perfect introduction to true Souls-like games. Games like Elden Ring or Dark Souls have very convoluted and lore-heavy stories that require you to do a fair bit of research if you truly want to understand what's going on. Here, you don't really need that. The story that they tell is self-contained enough to where it's enjoyable to play through and understand. Look, overall, I really like Black Myth Wukong. It's truly a fantastic game that's extremely approachable to people who may not be the typical audience for Souls-like games like these. I know most people look at the visuals and are enticed by that, but beneath all the bling, there's a really solid game here with really good gameplay and really great progression systems. I highly recommend you give this game a chance, and who knows, you may fall in love with it. Anyway guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed this style of video, again, please make sure to give it a like and subscribe if you want to see more. It's been CGG. I'm out.